Hey, happy holidays, Wade.
So far, yes.
We're back, and this is the last episode of 2024. And you know what, bro? I think that this is the perfect episode to give back to people who've been paving the way for guys like us, right? People who have launched podcasts, who have guested amazing people, who have inspired us to do our show. And today, we are honored to have author, magician, theurgist, and the founder of the ARCANUM podcast, Mr. Ike Baker, as our guest. But before we go any further, before we bring it on, you and I have a special announcement. You got my Christmas present yesterday, right, my friend? You
I
got it.
did.
And you know what, everyone? It's official. Magic.tv, the website, is launching in 2025. Yes, we got the domain name. It's officially magic.tv. And starting 2025, we're going to start uploading our blog posts, our downloadables, our episodes. And heck, I'll even give spaces to some of our guests if they want to do commentary there. But it's taking magic.tv to the next level. And coming 2025, the first series of the magic.tv compendium, where all of the teachings of Occultex of season 1 will be compiled into one mini magazine, not unlike our friends at Scavenged Rituals, and all the teachings from each guest with their permission and acknowledgement. We're going to be printing it, and we're also going to be giving the footnotes of what happened when me and Wade actually practiced these things. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that something that all of us can pretty much get behind right now?
It's going to be good.
Yeah, so and since we're already going into season 4, man, I'm just excited at how it's going to turn out. So without further ado, let's bring in our guest of honor. Who better than to not close season 4, but close 2024, a really great year. Our guest, Mr. Ike Baker. How you doing, Ike?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much for having me. Those are some very kind words you had to say. I appreciate it. I like I was telling you before we signed on, I've been keeping an eye on what you guys are doing because you can't really ignore the quality of the shows, the quality of the information, the quality of the guests, and the aesthetic is great and everything. So it's a real privilege to be on. Thank you for having me.
Well, the honor is all ours, Ike. I mean, I've been monitoring your stuff, and you're setting a standard with the Arcanum podcast. So, as we do with all our shows, tell us about you, Ike. What got you started? What got you started as an author? What got you started as a theurgist? What brought about the Arcanum podcast? We want to know about you.
All right, so I'll give you. I've mentioned this story a couple of times, but I want to tell it for your audience because it's a little weird. I had been studying this stuff in one form or another since about 2004. That was like my senior year in high school, really. So, compared to a lot of other people, I started late. A lot of people they get involved in this stuff kind of around 15, 16, just as kind of your sense of self is developing. But I got into it kind of late, and I studied it superficially because what was available to me in the suburban Long Island neighborhood I grew up in was, just I wasn't aware of that stuff. It wasn't burgeoning to the surface really, and I didn't know what markers to look for. So around, I want to say 2009, my aunt had a tenant who threw herself in front of a train, and she asked me to come over. Very quiet woman, didn't live with anybody, didn't have any next of kin. My aunt asked me, come over. It turns out she was a hoarder, and she's got like these just tons of stuff everywhere, and I need help taking some of this stuff, packing it up to donate or throwing it in the trash. So I go over, and there's tons of books, like the stuff you kind of see in movies where there's like aisles, in between them. A lot of stuff, just like journals wrapped in cellophane, etc. But one book caught my eye, and it's still on my bookshelf today. And it was just this very it had a very ornate cover, and it said it was called The Oracle of Kabbalah by Richard Seidman. And I said, this is going to be weird, but can I just take this and read it? She's like, yeah. If it doesn't get donated, then it's going in the garbage. So I walked around my neighborhood reading this book, and I finished it one day. It's not that big. But I can't say that I knew any more necessarily about Kabbalah than before I read it, but something stirred in me and was like, this is important. So I reached out when people were using like the yellow pages and the white pages on the internet, and I typed in a Long Island Kabbalah group, and this guy's information came up, and so I reached out, and so yeah, I'd like to study this stuff more. I'm like, well, that group doesn't meet anymore, but there's this other thing, and that other thing was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and I was very skeptical at first. As a matter of fact, I was a no call, no show to my first initiation. And I ended up like a typical flake. And I ended up circling back years later because my life completely fell apart. And just the house of cards I had built from then, from the time where I walked away from that doorway into the occult, the house of cards I had built since then completely crumbled. And so I was like, I don't know why, but I've got to go back to this. So I reached out, basically hat in hand, and they just, they gave me a second shot. And now, I train in that system. I train in other systems. But I'm still in the tradition. I'm the imperator of the Asheville Temple of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And, been doing that work now. Really, a lot of people don't understand this because a lot of people go through the outer order, the Golden Dawn, and they never get to the inner, or they get to the inner and they just kind of hang out at the neophyte grade of the inner order. But if you look at the earliest documents of the inner order, right, the flying rolls, it's explicit over and over and over again. Percy Bullock, Sam Mathers, William Wynne Westcott, they're saying, we do theurgy. You are here to do the divine Theurgy, as they put it. And so, I was practicing this stuff through the Golden Dawn. That's how I first learned about it, really, and what it was. And so, but you don't get this whole layout. You don't get this whole history, and you don't get this theory and like all this academic stuff like you do now. You get practices. Mm-hmm. So I started with practice, and I actually ended up sort of on the back end supplementing my knowledge, and then kind of delivering talks, right, as an inner order member and a temple chief. Like you give presentations to the outer order. You kind of take a teacher role. It's not a guru, but you give presentations. It's almost like Masonic education, if anybody's familiar with that. So from those series of lectures, really, I began to develop an understanding and a way to articulate how everything dovetails and how it's all kind of related from the standpoint of the practitioner. And that was basically an early precursor to everything that I've done on the Arcanum channel. But it wasn't until my encounter with Jamie Paul Lamb, the astrologer, and who's also, a practitioner in that tradition in the Golden Dawn. He's also a Mason. It wasn't until I met him that I was really inspired to do any public work. He was the one who pushed me and, said, hey, I see, he wanted to see some of my writing, and I sent it to him, and he kind of, got me involved with the Light Extended journals with Caribbean Press. And from there was like, hey, have you ever thought about doing a YouTube channel? And I do the YouTube channel, and he's like, oh, it's great. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And then I write a book. So it's, I like to tell people if you have no Jamie Lamb, there'd be no Ike Baker, really. So that's how everything really got started in the public.
All right, I'm curious. I don't know about the timeline, but what came first, the Formless Fire or the Arcanum podcast?
Well, the Arcanum came first. I just passed. It was December 18th, 2022 was the first episode I did. And then A Formless Fire actually just came out at the end of August, I think. Or beginning of September. So that came out on Tria Prima Press. So that's Jamie's publishing company, along with Jake Trayer and Pat Shanahan. But I wanted to take it further with A Formless Fire. There's only so much you can do in the YouTube format when you're doing documentaries. I found myself having to cut potentially an hour or two off of each episode, and they're still 45 minutes, an hour and change long. So I wanted to be able to go deeper and then tie everything together. And I have a very different writing style than speaking style.
Mhm.
You know, I like to incorporate a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of poetry, and some of my own editorial musings that come across as, I think in video when I'm speaking, they come across as more sarcastic than anything
Mhm.
else.
But that's coming from the whole, Eastern New York mentality. Sarcasm comes with morning coffee from the people I know. There's like, you should be worried if they're not being sarcastic to you because that means they don't like you. All right, I do have a question though. Like, Wade and I had our own inspiration when we put up Magic.tv, and we've shared that a million times. But I wanted to know from you, what was your original inspiration in creating the Arcanum podcast?
Well, aside from a couple people telling me that it might be a good idea, I think the main thing that I saw was I had a lot of experience with this stuff early on, and I had a lot of intense experience, and I had a lot of good, and I had a lot of bad experience.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I wanted to be able to do, people are going to do, and that's part of, I think, our God-given right as humans is to exercise what free will we do have and make
Mhm.
choices and experiment. But I wanted to offer an alternative that was a little bit more, that had a little bit more guardrails
Mhm.
on it for beginning practitioners, because you can, I think, if you don't think that there are any dangers inherent to some of this stuff, I question whether you believe in any of it.
Mhm.
Because there are real dangers to this. Like, what are you doing? We're not doing the same thing. If you clearly don't see that this can be dangerous. So I wanted to inform the beginner, uh, and at the same time contribute something to the more advanced and I guess you would say higher level conversations. And that's why I decided to start incorporating, other guests onto the podcast. Right, it started out as a documentary style thing, and I was doing a couple of podcasts with some friends of mine that were Masons and people from my Golden Dawn Temple. And then I started having people like Greg Sean and Dr. Shannon Grimes and Pierre Grimes and Stephen Skinner, David Rankin, having these people, and I wanted to get their take on a lot of this stuff. And my podcast is a little different. I get criticized for really, not being an interviewer. But if you listen to every single Arcanum podcast, they all start the same way. My conversation today is with X, Y, and Z. I do more conversational things because
Mhm.
I enjoy the meeting of the minds in a lot of ways, and part of it is selfish reasons. I have questions that I want to ask these people. I have ideas I want to bounce off of them. So that's what I think that I can offer in terms of what I do. That's not what everyone else is doing. I some of the conversations can get a little challenging. I like that. I
Mhm.
like the challenging conversations, and I would say to people, like, I disagree with probably 60% of what 90% of my guests have to say. But that's not, the point is not to agree. The point is, if I respect you and I think what you're doing is valuable and has merit, then you come on my show and we talk about it. I think that that's a really important thing to be doing right now.
Are there people, I don't want you to mention any names, but were there ever people that you refused to guest or platform due to ideological beliefs, or you just don't want to work with, or you don't believe in what they're doing, but wanted to be on the show? Did you ever have anything like that?
Um, I I haven't ever had anybody ask me to be on the show that I have flat out rejected. I've
Mhm.
had one or two people kind of come out of nowhere with no, like, you have, your work has to have inspired me in
Mhm.
some way. Otherwise it's like, are you just want to leverage what little platform I have.
Yeah.
um I don't know you. I don't. And some of the people that I have on the podcast I already knew before the podcast. I've done ritual with them in various states, and but some people I know just through their books or their classes. But that's some level of introduction. So when you come to me with no introduction, you have no book you can point me to, you have no podcast, nothing. It's just a cold call. I have a little bit of a difficult time, and I never say, "Hey, get lost." It's always like, let's wait, let's sit on it. Hit me back up in 6 months. Let's see where we're both at. Because I want to give people a shot. I do. But it's how do I know how this conversation is going to go?
Mhm.
My time, it has become a lot more restricted over the past 2 years, and so I really have to be judicious about how I spend it. Now, on the other hand, I've approached many of my favorite practitioners and scholars, and they've been like, "No, I'm not coming on that show."
Totally
So
understand that.
I've faced quite a bit of rejection myself, but it doesn't sour me on anybody. And on the other hand, there was one particular person that I'm not going to name,
Yeah,
I'm
no
not
need.
going to name him, but there was one particular person where the conversation was so awkward and uncomfortable and just clearly hostile from his end that I didn't end up airing it. But that only ever happened once. So
I was just about to ask you what the most challenging thing was, because you're from my point of view, I consider you a fellow occult enlisted in personnel. Because if you're holding a podcast like we are, we all come through several things. Like we've had some amazing people on Magic.tv, but like we had one person who's a wonderful person, but you could see that there were forces trying to cockblock this person's appearance, that they would kept on losing their audio, they got cut, and this was a lost episode. And this person was a wonderful person, but they told us, I won't mention if it was a male or female, they had a lot of enemies. So I think they were, we're magicians, so enough bad juju going your way is going to fuck things over. And we had another one too where it was a particular name. We won't mention the name that me and Wade looked up to, but when he got on the show, he was kind of a crusty fellow that the conversation was kind of dull. It was like, we really respect your work, but we need more to work with talking to you. This is still a show. I mean, Wade, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, right, bro?
Oh, yeah, that's one of the issues you get when you're doing a live show. Is you don't know what the other person's going to come up with. Maybe you're thinking like, "Wow, I read this guy's books. It's just full of fire and brimstone, and this guy is pulling down fire from heaven." And then you talk to him, and it's Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, when he's standing there just kind of droning on. And you're like, "Oh man, where was the fire from the book?" Some people really come off on the page. Some people have to come off in person.
And
Fortunately, me, I don't do either. So
well, that's the advantage of having two hosts of the show. That if we can really, like, sometimes Wade and I will send messages in the back room, but like, dude, this guy needs some prodding because we're gonna bore ourselves to death. But it's only happened once. Now, the next thing I wanted to get at about you is Formless Fire. Please tell us and the viewers about it. For those who know nothing about it, as if we know nothing, share with us the book, what it's about, what we can expect when we get our hands on it.
Sure. Well, I would say that to about 50% of the community, they're going to find it very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
To another 50% of the community, I think that they might, think it's stuff that is kind of out there, but has been brought to one place. And that's really what I was trying to do. There are a few insights that I try, and I don't want to be too heavy-handed about them. But if you can read between the lines and follow where I'm going, I think you'll arrive at the conclusion. At least that is my working model at this point in time. But essentially, I wanted to create it so that I went through the traditions, the Western esoteric traditions, chapter by chapter, stringing them together as chronologically as I possibly could, while devoting discrete chapters to each thing. So that if you want to pick it up, you just want to learn about the history, theory, and practice of alchemy, you can. You go to the alchemy chapter, you learn about the history, the theory, a little bit of the practice, and then there's an appendix in the back that I wrote with Daniel Wiseman of Secret Fire Apothecary that teaches you how to make a spagyric tincture of mercury. We have all the protocols, all the precautions, all the steps. So you want to learn about astrology. It's a chapter on the history theory, some of the practice. There's appendices. I think there's 8 appendices. There's different kind of charts, information, but mostly it's practical. You know, kind of early stuff, beginner stuff. You know, the lesser ritual of the pentagram, with my commentary that I give Golden Dawn students, and things like how to consecrate salt and water for the purposes of purification in your personal working spaces, things like that. But essentially, there is a thread that I wanted to follow, and I discussed that in the beginning in the apology in the beginning, the apologia, which I'm kind of, you know, just stating my thesis, basically that I wanted to follow the theurgic traditions because it's in the tradition of theurgy that I find the initiatic component that renovates the self and elevates the self. And we live in a time where all of us, myself included, could use a little more elevation, a little more evolution. And so I wanted to, if I'm going to, somebody's going to come to me and say, introduce this person to magic and the traditions and all that stuff. Well, I'm going to do my best to inculcate in them a sense of responsibility, an onus, you know, a real, not a burden, but truly a responsibility here to use this stuff wisely, and to encourage them down the initiatic path of transformation before, right? Because the whole theurgic school is predicated on the idea. You had Iamblichus teaching in the, you know, the 3rd century, and his school was predicated on, first, before you can do theurgy, you have to do this curriculum of reading of the Platonic dialogues, and you ascend what's called the ladder of virtues. You inculcate each particular virtue. Now, when you have assimilated that, and you can demonstrate that you are ready to be able to, and that comes in all sorts of ways, because you start gaining what we would consider or refer to as metaphysical or extra normal powers, abilities, become available to you by aligning yourself with this particular manifestation of cosmic order. And I've seen this in myself. You know, if you duly undergo and persist in something like the outer order, the spiritual alchemy of the outer order of the Golden Dawn, and it's not just you trying to, you know, shoehorn your expectations and what you want it to be and what you thought it was in there, and you allow the system to reveal itself to you, allow those energies to work in you, this will happen. But a lot of people get in the way of that process. I see it all the time. And because they either want it to be something, or they thought it was going to be something other than it is. So I wanted to approach the traditions from that, because it is a theurgic tradition that comes to us through Masonry, through the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, through the Aurum Solus, all of these things. The way that these traditions were transmitted to the point where we have them, and all their offshoot orders, right? All the various splinter orders and personalities and authors that they spawned. It all was through this initiatic theurgic trajectory. That's what they were doing. So I wanted to show how that got transmitted, explain a little bit about what it was, how philosophy dovetails with it, and then how a beginner can practically use it. So again, but it's separated by chapter. You know, I go through quite a bit. There's stuff on the French occult revival, theosophy, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Renaissance stuff. You know, Pico della Mirandola, Agrippa, Trithemius, Lazzarelli, Ficino, all these people, and how it kind of dovetails. You know, there's even a little bit on Giordano Bruno and stuff like this. You get a good amount of history. And another point I wanted to show is that occult history is the history of the world. You know, we're taught this outer door sort of way to look at history. But once you enter into the traditions practically, and you kind of looking at it from the inside out, it's like, my God, all these people were either alchemists, astrologers, magicians, you know, belonged to some sort of, you know, clandestine fraternity that was doing evocation. So it's I wanted to impart a little bit of that wonder, because if that fills me with a sense of awe, and I wanted to also give that to people. And so I don't know if that's the best description of the book, but to be honest with you, I mean, there's a lot of shit in there. There's a lot of
Well, it
stuff.
sounds like it. And I wanted to ask, is it already available for those who want to buy? Is it available on Amazon or only exclusively from your website? I mean, where can we get a copy of that?
It's available on Amazon, but it's not necessarily, that's not the place that you really want to buy it, because,
Mhm.
and I think other authors are going to kind of agree with this, it's not like you get fractions of pennies
Yeah.
from Amazon sales. So the publisher, they're a small Masonic imprint out of Phoenix. It's called Tria Prima Press. So if you go to triaprimapress.com, you can look in their product section and just find a Formless Fire. So triaprimapress.com. You can buy the book directly from the publisher there, and we take care of all the shipping and everything.
All right, because the next thing I wanted to ask too is, like, I noticed that you've been publishing your upcoming Theurgy series that you're going to be sharing with people to enroll into. You want to just share with us and the viewers a bit about that? Because I'm sure for those who don't have the book and who would want more interaction with you as a teacher, this could be a good option. So take it away.
Sure, thank you. So I've been doing a series called they're about an hour and a half long lecture with Q&A. $15. I do them once a month for $15. The sign up, all that stuff, the promotions, it's on my social medias. I send out blasts on my email list. If you go to my website, ikebaker.com, ikebaker.com, you can join the mailing list and you can ask me questions. But I do that once a month, and I'm going through the curriculum of the Platonic dialogues of Iamblichus, what I had mentioned earlier about the ladder of virtues. I'm discussing these things with my commentary. Now, I'm using Syrianus, Damascus, Hermias, Proclus. I'm using the later Neoplatonists, their commentary, in that I've studied a lot of them and have assimilated them. But these are specifically what I would consider my own commentaries on the Iamblichian curriculum of the Platonic dialogues. And I incorporate everything, kind of devolves back to theurgy. So we're not reading these things for the value of epistemology. We're not reading these things for the value of, some sort of pre-modern system of logic. We're reading them and looking at the points, okay, here in the Phaedrus, this gives that whole sort of tirade, the inspired rant that Socrates, it gives the whole formula of theurgy, the whole thing, the charioteer, everything, the submersion into the noetic realm, the train of the gods and all this stuff. It's all there. And so I go through each one of these once a month. Then what I do is I put them up on my Patreon. So if you subscribe to my Patreon and you weren't able to attend the class, well, you're not going to be able to participate in the Q&A, but you can just go to my Patreon and look at it. I am doing a free class January 4th. And that is going to be on the luminous body. And so essentially that's an aspect of theurgy that is little suspected by people who are kind of new to this. And the Greeks had something, the Neoplatonists, they had something called the avroedis soma. And that often gets translated into like the body of light. I happen to speak Greek because that's my ethnic background. My father was from Greece, and avro is egg in Greek. This type of translation issue has really bothered scholars for a long time. It's actually avroides. Avroides. It's egg-shaped, the egg-shaped body. And if you know anything about the theory of auras, that's exactly what an aura looks like. It's an egg. It's more of an oval than it is a sphere. So I'm teaching a class on. It's a free lecture on the history theory, and then some practical applications of working with the energy bodies. That is the subject in its entirety of my second book, Etheric Magic, which is Llewellyn is putting it out this April. April 8th. It should be out. You can pre-order it now, Etheric Magic. With my second book, it's a whole system of using the energy body, learning to sense it, learning to see it, learning to feel it, move it, direct it, cultivate it for the purposes of Western ceremonial. Because that I did find that to be sorely missing in when I joined, when I entered into the traditions here. I had also at the same time, been studying qigong and tai chi and things like that. My training actually is in Chinese medicine, Chinese herbalism, acupuncture, and physiotherapy. So I had a lot of experience on that end. I was like, yeah, I mean, they're doing this in Taoist rituals, consecrating talismans and stuff. Why aren't we using energy with any sort of intentionality? Look here. Look in the ancient Greek text. Look in De Anima, right, by Iamblichus, and some of his fragments. Porphyry talks about it, the body of light. They also call it the Okima Pneumaticon, the spiritual chariot, the spiritual vehicle. So it's not woo-woo, and it's not incompatible. As a matter of fact, it's just a part of our tradition we have effectively lost, probably due to issues of postmodernism, post-enlightenment era stuff, where it's like, yeah, that's pseudoscience. It's like, yeah, but you're consecrating a talisman, you're complaining about pseudoscience, like, like what kind of double speak is this? So there's that, and then that class is to promote something that's really, really special. This October, I'm going to be hosting an on-site 9-day field immersion in Egypt with 16 participants. Yeah, 16 participants. I'm calling it Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Theurgy, because we're focusing on, again, the theurgic magic. Now, if you put a Goez, right, somebody who practiced Goetic magic, and a theurgist side by side in a temple space, and you said, guys, go at it. What the techniques they'd be employing, the things, the names and everything would be like almost indistinguishable. It's the intentionality. That's all it is. So you'd be learning things that you can apply however you want, because I'm sourcing them from PGM, from De Anima, from the Chaldean Oracle, fragments that we have from the Michael Sellos, Marsilio Ficino. Now, everything has to be a little bit of a reconstruction, but I have skill in this area. I've got many, many years of experience in practicing this stuff. So I'm able to reconstruct the parts where there are gaps, I think, very effectively, and in a way that does not come across as like pastiche. It's not superimposed. There's an authenticity to it, because I've been to Egypt several times. I'm my ethnic background is Greek. I've been there many times. I want to respect these traditions, but at a certain point, you have to reconstruct. There's not enough there to they don't give you everything, or it was lost. So
you got to fill in the gaps.
Exactly, and to make it workable. And part of that naturally is how a living tradition gets created. These things have to. It's almost like bloodletting. At a certain point, you need new blood, and this is the way I think some of these egregores and traditions get them. Some of it gets lost, and new people have to take up the mantle and
Very true.
apply what they know. Now, as long as you don't lose the script completely, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to retain its essence. But this is how we make them more applicable in the modern day, because people change. And what is magic if not the phenomenology of the gods, in a very intentional way? So our people change, circumstances change. So I'm going to be teaching that with 16 people, techniques of Greco-Egyptian theurgy. I'm doing that with Argos Destinations. That's in October of 2025. There are still slots. We are accepting registration up until March 21st. I do a full breakdown. We did a digital open house. And I did a full breakdown of the itinerary, what sources I'm using, how I reconstructed the stuff. People ask great questions. That's up on the ARCANUM channel. That's a video you can watch. And in the About section of that video is the itinerary for you to view. There's a link to the itinerary and a link to register. So we still have open slots, and for anybody that's interested in learning some of this stuff, you get a little sample on January 4th, 4 p.m. Eastern time, with the luminous body talk, and then we're going to be going in depth. We're going to be doing multiple sessions a day. We're going to be doing on-site stuff. We have private access to many of these temples, and so we'll be doing stuff on site, which is really exciting.
That's amazing. So, this brings me to the next question, which is the current event segment. And I think you're one of the best people to ask, because nowadays people are kind of getting tired with the old orthodoxies, and you got a lot of resurgence in some of the old gods coming back. Like, personally speaking, I think Hecate is on a tear. She's really recruiting a lot of new amazing souls, and she's already eking her way into the zeitgeist. Like, you could even see in certain shows nowadays and in movies, the symbology of Hecate is there, and you could sense like this is a very Hecatean energy. But she's not the only goddess doing that. There are other gods that have been kind of forgotten and neglected that are slowly coming back. It's almost like a chapter out of Neil Gaiman's American Gods. So I wanted to ask you, what's your take on the future or the present stance of not just magic and occultism, but your field of theurgy? Is it going to be growing? Are the new god or the old gods coming back? Or is this just a TikTok trend taken out of context? I mean, I'd love to hear your 2 cents on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And to be honest with you, nobody's ever asked me that in those terms. I think that's a really good question. There is a bit of American gods in what's going on. And I think I tend to look at things rather than looking at things from like the mundane outward. I tend to somehow look at things from the perspective of spirit downward, if that makes sense. It's an analogy, probably a poor one, but I would even say that something like Neil Gaiman's American Gods were the gods trying to inspire this person to tell us something about what they want and what they're doing. So I would even look at that book as something that is a product of divine inspiration to a degree, and magic itself. So from a theurgic standpoint, I would say traditional theurgic standpoint, the gods never leave, because for the gods to leave, it would mean that nothing could exist. Everything is composed of the various diffused permutations of the synthemata, the signatures of the gods. So they're here with us all the time. It's just kind of like Neil Gaiman very aptly kind of intuited, are we giving them our focus? Are we giving them our attention? And they thrive on that, but there's a reciprocal relationship, because they change us when we begin to interact with them. And one of the very important ways in which I think a practitioner becomes changed is you begin to understand in some way, and I think this is really important for new practitioners, people getting involved in this stuff, that you have, by default, most of us in the Western world in 2024, 1990, 1980, we have factory installed settings. We have a perceptual software that is akin to like these contact lenses that you're always wearing, but you don't know are there. And that is a postmodern reductionist bias. And a lot of us are filtering. We're trying to filter something that is thousands of eons old. And its expression is very, very old, very, very ancient, very, very established. We're trying to filter it through this postmodern filter, this lens. And that is where I think, if not serious error, I would say an impediment to the modern manifestation of these old powers will occur. Because no matter what it is, it's always going to be filtered through the psyche of the practitioner. Whether it's an evocation, whether it's a channeling, whether it's a message, it always has to go through the psyche of the practitioner. Even in times where you're being ridden by a god or something, it still has to leave through your physical mechanism, and it's in some way filtered by you. So one of the best things that we can do is engage in our work to a profound level that allows us to see the areas where we may be misinterpreting or mistranslating things. And because, I think this manifestation of or this resurgence of this power, these powers in the world is trying to get us to alter exactly just such modes of being, right? So you have to connect with essentially an ancient worldview. To what extent that is actually possible, 100% is debatable. But you have to at least acknowledge that you can't keep filtering stuff through these, very new ways of looking at the world, because they isolate us. A lot of this stuff acts as a caustic agent to any kind of reconstructive or constructive order. So I think personally we are in a time where things need to be. I'm not even saying this is a political statement. If anything, I'm saying this is a cosmological, astrological statement. We're in a phase of deconstruction and dismantling right now. That's just what it is. But the thing is, something is going to be rebuilt in its place. And so we need to make sure that we can follow the promptings to allow us to act in guidance rather than in pure will, and get out of the way of the process a little bit. And one of the ways you do that is by at least noticing and beginning to dissolve this postmodern reductionist bias. And then I'm hoping that some of my work will contribute to that, but I can't even claim that I've done it completely in myself. Everything I have is just a working model.
I have a question. Wade used to, as a Thelemite, because I'm not one, Wade's a Thelemite, he would talk about a ritual that Aleister Crowley wrote, which was called the Liber Astarte, right? Which would make you inherently a priest of a chosen god. Do you think that these kind of workings are going to be the new orthodoxy of the old gods? Like, Wade, I don't understand how Liber Astarte works. Maybe you want to fill Ike in on it so we can get his two takes on it?
Basically, what it is you start off with levels. Like, say, if you wanted to do a Liber Astarte for Anubis, you would start by studying all the stuff that are associated with it, with the temple, or at least with the outer layer of the temple. So you would approach it sort of like the common person coming to the temple of Anubis. You're not allowed in the outer doors, but how would you be able to leave offerings and whatnot, say prayers? And eventually you'd get to the point where you could go in through the outer doors, and then you'll be able to pass more and more barriers as you became more intimately connected with the gods, to the point that you would be able to assume the god form itself when you have it fully completed. But the interesting experiences that I had with Liber Astarte are that you can do this with any god. You can do this with fictional gods. That was the part that really surprised me. And you get some really strong results. You can get some pretty scary results too. But that's the basic premise of it, is that it's a formula for becoming the priest of any given god.
Yeah, well, there's multiple things there. I know that Crowley, having come from a Golden Dawn background, would have at least been aware of the many guardrails and protocols to keep something like that relatively to plan. But I think that one of the things, and I've talked to David Rankine about stuff like this on the podcast, one of the issues that you run into is that you're only ever really experiencing, even in true evocation, you're only ever really experiencing a portion of whatever you want to call it, this deific power or energy or presence. Like when people, David put it this way, when you're doing the LBRP or something like that, that's the ritual of the pentagram, and you've got your invocations in the quarters. He said, I hope you don't think that the archangels are actually in your space. It's there. You're creating wards, because those beings don't actually possess a physicality like we do, in that sense, an anthropomorphized physicality. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that we are creating images, hopefully, that are harmonious and call forth the essences of these things, to animate them in some way that is true. We can communicate with their intelligent energies. That's basically a truism of anybody that's been in this stuff for a while. Then on the other hand is, how reliable is it that I am talking to what I think I'm talking to.
Mhm.
That's a question. It's addressed in the Chaldean oracles, right? The Chaldean oracle is a fragment that says, the dog-faced demons ever dragging down the soul, showing no true form to mortal gaze. So what can we do to compel these things or impel them, right? If they're gods, you can't compel them. You can impel them. You can encourage them to do something. But how can we impel them to be what they say they are? So that's not to say anything definitive about any particular practice. But these are my concerns. This is my take on a lot of this stuff, which is another reason why I started teaching and doing that stuff is how and it was brought to mind by the idea, you're talking about fictional gods that you're doing this stuff to. My first question, and maybe again, it could be because I came up through the HOGD, and I'm a little bit of a, what do they call them? A spiritual hypochondriac, like a germaphobe, because that will definitely be imparted on you by that system to some degree. Maybe that's just that inherent tendency that's been trained in me. But my first question would be like, what am I doing to make sure that this is what it's telling me it is? And to what end can I really be sure of that beyond a shadow of a doubt? But what I do appreciate very much about the method, like all other forms of initiation into, priesthood or priestesshood or something like that, some sort of hieratic devotion, there's a relationship being built. There's that out, as you say, the outer door and the inner door. And I think that that's really, really important. And I would say that that's a keystone of really good magic.
Wow. So you know what? Brings me to the last part of the show, occult X, and this is where you show to us any technique. You teach us something. You, the master, and I could probably think of 100 things I'd love to learn from you, but I'll let you decide. But I'm sure you're pretty much going to decide on what you're going to share with us today because we kind of picked on it earlier. So we'd love to learn something from you, Ike. It could be Theurgy, could be magical. Heck, like we said in the past, you could teach us how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but please don't do that. We have like other hopes and aspirations from you. So take it away, Ike.
I used to make some pretty excellent peanut butter and jelly, I gotta say.
I bet you would. I bet you would.
So yeah, we were talking about before. You were telling me about your devotional practice and how you can kind of go a little deeper into that using traditional sources. Now, I working on some of the several techniques that I've kind of like been developing and reconstructing for this Egypt trip. I've had a lot of help in doing that stuff. It's beyond the capabilities of any one person. And somebody that really first introduced me to this idea was P.D. Newman. So who is amazing in his own right and a great scholar and a great practitioner. But one of the ways that I was saying that if I were you, I would kind of go a little deeper because it's something I actually just did was statue animation. And it's not really what it sounds like, but let's look at the PGM, what that has to say, and let's look also at the Chaldean oracles. And again, if you're talking about Hecate, okay, there's a fragment or a paragraph in Hippolytus's refutation of all heresies where there's a missing sort of prayer in the PGM. It says, okay, you're going to do the statue like this, X, Y, and Z, do it this way, consecrate in the full moon and recite this prayer, and the prayer's gone. Well, so there's sort of a reconstruction of it in Hippolytus's refutation of all heresies. We know because he was a student of Proclus for the evocation of a fiery bombos Hecate. And so kind of making this kind of surgery, to reconstruct this stuff. This is typical of how this stuff is going to go. You could just as easily pull something out of the PGM. There's a prayer to Selene that refers to her as the three-faced goddess, the goddess of the triple cross. It's in her aspect as Hecate, right? So you could just as easily supplement that. But what you would do is you get a block of wax, right, and you carve about 6 to 9 inch statue. It doesn't have to be ornate. It doesn't have to look exactly. If you want to, you could do like the 3-face kind of thing. But what I do is I carve the name in either Greek or Coptic of whatever deity you're working with, vertically along the back, working my way downward. And then turn it over, and you hollow out the abdominal cavity, the chest cavity, and all that stuff. You don't want to make it too thin so that there's a perforation and stuff starts to fall out. But what you're going to do there is you're going to find your traditional correspondences. So for something like you were talking about Anubis, I would use myrrh, right? Because that's associated with embalming. I'd use dead things. You use your own discretion there. And you fill the cavity up with. You're only going to have little. You're not going to have much space, so these won't be large items. You fill the cavity with that. You take some of the wax that you had saved. You'd melt that back on, allow that to harden, and there you go. You have your symbola, right? Your agalma, your statue to be consecrated, but it hasn't been quote unquote perfected or consecrated yet, right? It hasn't undergone telestike. So what you would do is you take it out into the waxing moon, as we do with many of these evocations and formulas. You would suffumigate it in the moonlight. Particularly, I would do the moonlight for Anubis. I'd also be watching Sirius for something like Hecate. I'm going to look really, really. I'm going to make sure I have a really, really good moon election, or at least the best I can get in the waxing period, and lunar election, and then you fumigate it with its attendant incenses, and you do the invocatory prayer. But you don't stop there, right? Okay, now you've got your consecrated, your animated statue, right? My two methods are dreams and scrying. That's how you would allow that to come to you. So, you'd put it on your nightstand before bed, and you'd kind of do an evocatory prayer. It's very important in all of these that you're asking for what you want, which in this case would be appear to me, come to me. I want to see you, and whatever information that you want to retrieve or be inspired with. You put it next to the bedside. For Hecate, keep her in like a little bit of a laurel wreath. You could find some creative. You might want to put Anubis by like craft some sort of canopic jar or something, right? That'd kind of be cool. You put it inside or beside it, play with that, and do your evocations, and then make sure that you're writing down what happens in a journal. I'd keep a dream journal right next to me if I were doing that. And the other thing is that you could just as easily scry. Keep this statue and do your whole scrying process. I use an obsidian mirror. I gave a pretty decent presentation about how to scry and why to scry and the practice of it at this year's Esotericism and Masonry conference. But yeah, so that's how I would do that. Now the point is to make the contact. So from that then on, they can tell you how they want you to go about this next time, right? Because that's the main goal. It's not so much to do the textbook formula. It's an initial thing. Okay, great. I'm here. You nailed it. Now here's how we're going to do this going forward. And so I think that's important to keep in mind when you're working this stuff. It's not all permanently formulaic.
So basically, that's what you use for first contact, but they give you a speed dial number afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Now you mentioned beeswax. Could you also use clay?
You could, but I haven't perfected that method of getting the synthemata inside the clay. You could I guess bake it, harden it, and then fill with the hollowed out cavity, and then fill it up, and then put clay over it again, and then go and bake it and see if you can get that to stick. But I don't really work too much with clay, because the few times I have, it's just maybe I've not bought the right clay or something like that, but it's just it's not been very durable for me. But you could, if you found out, especially if that material that you're using is very consonant with the what you're evoking. You know, like if it's some sort of like chthonic or earth based, if it has some affinity to a certain type of clay or mortar or something like that, physical dirt, then I would.
Well, one of my favorite things to work with is if I can find a deposit of local clays that I actually dig up, because you use natural clay, it air dries.
Mhm.
So like, if you're going to hollow it out and do all your stuff and then seal it up while it's still wet,
Mhm.
that would dry out with all the stuff inside.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering, because beeswax, for some reason, anything I ever get out of beeswax melts on me. My house doesn't get particularly hot, but it always ends up melting or drooping or whatever. I just thought clay might be more durable. I didn't know if you'd ever worked with that or if it had to be beeswax specific.
No, I get a pretty hard beeswax. They come with all different kind of. It's kind of like soap, you know. Like you can get some that's a little soft and some that's a little harder. The stuff that I've been working with is particularly hard, so that makes the whole process of cutting it and carving it a little more difficult. And you know, you got to spend some time to get the thing actually looking kind of not like Gumby or something like that. But yeah,
Little
you can
Oscar statue.
here in I mean North Carolina, you know, Western North Carolina, Asheville, where I was living for a little while, past few years, it's all red clay. So I've not been able to really hard thick. You know, I worked as a carpenter for a while, and I had to like dig 12-foot holes and that stuff, and it's just not easy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be pretty durable if you could get your hands on. I never attempted anything with it.
Is there something significant about the sealing of the correspondent material? Like, this, we're going to play modern with this. Could we 3D print an Anubis statue, but with a cavity that could be sealed, and we could seal it in beeswax afterwards? Or is it more like the symbolism that we're doing it in the ancient materials that gives power to it?
Well, I would say right, Hecate has a correspondence with bees, and so that was my first kind of my first idea to do. You know, I wanted to do it with wax, but also, you know, other people also use wax. It's not a wholly original idea, and I've worked with that material before in candle making. Um, but I would say the more you can utilize natural materials which have an affinity, which share the synthemata, the signature, right? Agrippa would have called them sigillum, you know, the occult virtues, the virtues that you cannot see. I mean, it's a very old idea, you know, Greco-Egyptian idea that, you know, the gods are nature, you know, and so, but this one, you know, whatever it is in Greek, Aphrodite presides over the flower of the rose, but Ares presides over the thorn of the rose. So this is it's all permutative, and everything's kind of, that's how everything is made in their estimation. So you find things that have the affinity, and the various, you know, symbola. A symbola not only is materials, it can be words. You the pronouncements of either barbarous names or ephesiagrammata, or, you know, titles, epithets, other names for the god. You know, these things all have a certain affinity and a power. So you want to, if you can, you want to use as much of that synthemata, much of those, a symphony of inherent characteristics to that particular deity, and that is how the thing is able to be consecrated in the first place. But in lieu of that, I think as long as you're filling that cavity with, you know, if you like, you might be able to 3D print a bigger statue, you know, and fill it more full of stuff. And if that were the case, I mean, and you had it a material, I would even paint a likeness on there. That would be excellent. You know, I can't really do that with beeswax. So yeah, everything has its own kind of advantages, pros and cons. And it's, I would say though, as much of that material as you can really get in there.
Because like for Anubis, I was thinking like making a effigy out of him out of leather, because basically that's just dead skin, right?
There
And
you
then
go.
or even out of bone if possible. You know what I mean? Like having a bone carved into a statue with a cavity in the back where you could fill in the materia. I mean, that sounds like something I would do.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. I love the idea of making a little bone sculpture.
Well, anyhow, Ike, you know what? That was amazing. We have learned much. Wade, anything you want to say to our guest before we let him go?
I'm good. I'm still kind of excited to try some of this with clay.
Me too, man. I gotta find enough bone in order to make a bone statue. But before we let you go, Ike, is there anything you want to share with our attendees or our guests? So at least they know where to find you, how to contact you if they want to join your course, so we can support you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you guys very much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure and extremely stimulating conversation. You can find me on just my website, ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER.com.
Mm-hmm.
I've got everything up there. I've got like my latest, channel video, latest couple of podcasts. I've got blogs. I did the New Hermopolis or the Hermopolis Symposium this year at the New Hermopolis village in Minya, Egypt, where you can still buy it was 3 days of talks by some of the top academics and practitioners sequestered at the New Hermopolis village, and we exchanged ideas. Walter Hanegraaff was there. Dr. Shannon Grimes, Greg Shaw gave us a presentation digitally. Dr. Charles Stang was there. He was a keynote speaker he's the director of the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions. And then we had practitioners like P.D. Newman, like Jamie Lamb, like Soledad Davies, who she runs Psicosematica, which I think is Europe's only Spanish-speaking institute for the study of astrology. So we had all those people there, and we have a digital track and an on-site track, which is at the moment audio only. You can purchase all of those, essentially 6 days worth of presentations for $90. There's a link to that on my webpage, and everything else. The video for the techniques of Greco-Egyptian theurgy, the digital open house is there, along with registration links. And I do some private tutorship. I have some private students, and for anybody that wants to study personally, one-on-one, you can reach out to me through the website. I do free 30-minute consultations just to talk about what your goals are. Is this a good fit? What do you want to accomplish? So there's that. You can get all that stuff at IKEBaker.com. Thank you guys very much.
So we're going to end the stream, but don't go anywhere. Once again, thank you very much, Ike, for joining us. You were the last but amazing way of ending the year. See you all next year for our next episode. I'll be announcing it lately. Good night, everyone. Ike, don't leave.